likely heard that the Pope has died. Now, whether you grew up revering that office or rejecting it outright, what happens next, the selection of a new Pope, isn't just a pageantry of smoke and Latin incantations. It's the global appointment of someone who claims moral authority over a billion people and whose teachings have real-world consequences for policy, healthcare, education, and the safety and dignity of LGBTQ people, of women, and countless others. For many who are still healing from the influence of the RCC, news coverage over the past week has been rough. And let's be clear, this isn't just about theological opinions or ceremonial hats. The next pope will influence the church's stance on birth control access in regions battling poverty, the treatment of queer youth in Catholic schools, the messaging around HIV/AIDS prevention, and the church's role in protecting or ignoring survivors of abuse, both modern sexual abuse scandals and historical, generations-long efforts to subjugate indigenous peoples. His words will echo in legislation across Latin America, Africa, and here in the US, where bishops and lawmakers are increasingly flaunting the wall of separation. So, even if we don't kneel at that altar, we can't afford to look away, because when religious doctrine is used to justify harm, silence becomes complicity, and we're here to make a little noise. So even if you don't believe in the throne of St. Peter, the people in power who are writing laws, shaping culture, and making decisions that reach far beyond the Vatican walls often do. Today, I want to ask, why does this matter? And how do we, as people committed to reason, compassion, and justice, respond to this moment? Hold on to your pointy hats, find your questions, and let's get into it, because the show is coming right now. Okay, welcome everyone. Today is May 4th, 2025. I'm your host, licensed professional counselor, Christy Powell, and with me today is 15-year veteran and assistant professor of national defense studies, Talk Heathen's assistant producer, Jimmy Jr.
Hey, Christy, what is up? Thank you for taking your time out this fine Sunday to work with me. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to be diving into all of this. When you and I were kind of tossing ideas around for what to talk about today, it didn't occur to me that we would be getting into the larger politics and the like global struggle of papal conclaves. But I guess it kind of comes with the territory when we spend so much time talking about magical thinking and strange ancient religions.
Yeah, absolutely. And this selection of the Pope, the passing of the Pope, these have enormous implications for the global population. They've got what we call second and third order effects, where the consequences of them also have their own consequences, and so on and so forth. And there's this ripple effect that reaches across governments and institutions, all the way down to individual constituents and congregations. So there is a lot of attention that people should be paying. What do we expect to see in the next couple of weeks? What are going to be the implications that we will have to live with? And I thought that your intro was so good. And I love that you said silence becomes complicity, because it really does. And I don't remember who said it, but there's a very popular phrase, inaction or silence always helps the oppressor, never the oppressed, right? And, I think that it's important to pay attention to these massive, very, very wealthy power structures that are putting people atop of them, and to see what those consequences are going to be.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, people ask us all the time, why do we talk about God? Why can't we just let people have their God? What do atheists have to do with any of these discussions? And, there really are some important implications. We're going to get into all of that throughout the course of the show. Mostly, though, we want to hear from you. We want to hear your live calls, because Talk Heathen is a production of the Atheist Community of Austin, a 501c3 nonprofit organization that's dedicated to the promotion of atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. or a live call-in show, we've got open lines. So give us your calls because we're at 512-991-9242, or you can catch us from your computer at tiny.cc/callth. And as those calls continue to come in, let's go ahead and bring in our producer, Richard, for our question of the week, the Talk Heathen to Me segment. Richard, what you got for us today?
Hello. It's in fact time for our Talk Heathen to Me segment where we get into the questions of the week. And last week, we asked you, how would Jesus' story be different if he were born today? And here are our top 3 answers. Number 3, X million. Today, Jesus would be all but hurt because he got denied to appear on Amazing Randy's show. Now, that would have been a top pullering of viewers, I am absolutely sure. What do you guys think about that one?
Give me some context here. I wonder if I'm the only one in the audience who doesn't know Amazing Randy.
I am with you there. I do not know who that is.
Right. Oh, wow. Okay, so the Amazing Randy was a magician and also a skeptic. He had and I think it's still going actually, a fund put to one side where he said that if anybody can prove the supernatural, they will get $1 million.
Okay, yeah, I do remember Amazing Randy now. Thank you for getting me there.
Yeah, it did have a few takers. All of them failed. Some of them did really, really good jobs at kind of trying to get past him and the kind of things he said. But in fact, I don't think it was his show as such, but I think there was another show invited on a guy who claimed he could move things with the power of his mind, and he was using his breath, but he did it so subtly the skeptics on the show couldn't figure out how they was doing it, so they actually called James Randi in to kind of have a look at it, and he figured out what he was doing and how he was using his breath in this really subtle way to maneuver things. Really great stuff if you get a chance to go. The guy's called James Randi, by the way, his full name. If you've not seen his stuff before, go and see him. James Randi, the Amazing Randy. He died a few years ago. Really, really great magician, great skeptic. And as I said, I think this fund, if I'm incorrect in this, please someone correct me. I believe this fund is still available. If anyone can produce under laboratory conditions evidence of the supernatural, they will get this money. This fund, this has been going for decades, and no one has ever managed to claim the money.
Funny how safe of a bet that can really turn out to be.
That would be hilarious if Jesus showed up but failed to prove the supernatural and didn't get the money.
Or just collects the check and bails.
I've had this conversation with people before. I've had debates about this before, and all of the miracle claims that I know of in the resurrection, in the Bible, apart from the resurrection, which is kind of different, but all of the other alleged miracle claims in there can be kind of reproduced by other means or accounted for by other means. Yeah, I have like Sarah and her husband, whoever, I can't remember Sarah's husband's name, that's the one who had the baby at an exceptionally old age. That's not a miracle. That is something that is possible. It just falls into the law of very large numbers. You've got other things like turning water into wine or walking on water, which are replicable by other means, and magicians have performed these tricks. So it's really important. This thing that James Randi put out is actually really, really important to differentiate between the genuine supernatural and something that may even appear to be supernatural, but might have another explanation. So onwards and upwards. Number 2, Chuck Gados. How would Jesus' story be different today? His 1,000-seat church, television network, radio stations, YouTube channel, mass mailing, and private jet would help him reach more people than walking around talking to people. That's quite controversial. Wow. He was quite liberal, we are led to believe. What do you two think about that one?
I think it's just challenging to really stop and think about the fact that, like, Jimmy Jr. and I have probably participated in clips or conversations that have been shown to larger audiences than Jesus could have ever hoped to speak to.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, it is weird when you think about population growth and some of these things. And why would our all-loving God who wanted to connect with us do so by sending somebody to a group of shepherds 2,000 years ago in the middle?
Yeah.
Like, how is that the best strategy? I don't know. I think these are great points Chuck is bringing out.
That is a mind-blowing piece of statistic to think about. I'm not exact statistic, but yeah, if you were to compare some of the people, like I've had 1,000 views on some videos, right, or 6,000 views, or here and there. I don't think the Bible talks about Jesus reaching that many people. Christy, you just blew my mind. Right. On the flip side, though, I was listening to something about the Pope and how cardinals would go into selecting the next Pope. And something that was interesting to me is that all of the cardinals from North America, it's almost a requirement for them to have a TikTok and an X account, and they've got so many followers, and that is actually something foreign to some of the other cardinals that will be voting. So I wonder how that access will play out into how the next pope is chosen. But Chuck, that was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, great points there from both of you. Just to let people know as well, this channel alone has almost 100,000 subscribers, which is far more people than Jesus would have ever communicated to in his lifetime. So in that way, we are better than Jesus, people. We really are.
People didn't like or subscribe. What can I say?
The number one comment again is Chuck Gados, and I know we had more people than two responding to these things. So Johnny P. Angel, who chose these comments, what is your thing with Chuck Gados? I'm going to investigate this and get to the bottom of it. Number one, Chuck Gados, how would Jesus' story be different today? He's having to do 2 weeks of community service for our sins. Sometimes seems unimpressive. That's a good one. I like that. What do you two guys think?
Fair to say, yeah.
Yeah, he probably could have just gotten off with paying a fine. I don't know. And you know, I had to do community service once when I was a younger man and not as responsible. But the guy who ran the community service program said, hey, look, if you can build me these birdhouses, then I'll use those and give you community service hours, because I run bingo on like Wednesday nights or something, and I'll auction off these birdhouses. And now Jesus, being the carpenter that he was, I can just picture Jesus being in trouble with the Romans and building birdhouses to get out of being crucified. So hey, legit story. I speak from experience.
Absolutely. That's great. I love these questions this week. The prompt for next week is rewrite a scripture using modern slang. That's rewrite a scripture using modern slang. Enter your best answers below the video in the comments, and next week we will reveal our top 3 answers. But of course, I'm not letting the hosts get off that scot-free. I want to know what they think a scripture using modern slang would be like. Christy, Powell, I'm going to hit you up first on this one.
Oh man, yeah, I'll kick it off for our audience, who will do much better. Me trying to use modern slang is about as cringe as YouTube can get, but I was interested in this interpretation of Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, which says, put all of your trust in God, but like for really reals. Don't just go off what you think you know, and everything you do, let him take the lead. He'll show you the right way to go.
Oh my goodness.
Jimmy.
That's hilarious. So yeah, like Christy, I don't know that I have the skill to communicate with young people today. So I relied on ChatGPT to deconstruct and piece together John 3:16 so that I could communicate in today's world. Yo, God had mad love for the world, so much that he sent his one and only son. Anybody who rides with him, they ain't going to get wrecked. They're going to get that forever life, for real.
I love it. I love this. I'm not going to chuck one in here. I am going to implore our wonderful audience, because I know some of you are from the fair city of Glasgow. I'd like to just see one done in Glaswegian slang. That would be amazing. Right, guys, I'm going to drop out. I'm going to let you get on with the show. Thank you very much. I will see you all later.
Thank you, Richard.
All
Lord,
right.
I'm just hoping my 16-year-old never catches this clip. I feel like this one little piece of me on the internet among the hundreds of hours could be the thing that he never lets me live down.
Yeah, or never shows anyone, right?
Yeah.
I have a 16-year-old, and I've determined that it's probably best to just stop communicating with her friends. I seem to screw that up somehow.
Heard.
But
yeah. Well, so Jimmy, as we are waiting for folks to go through the call screening process and to really share with us their thoughts on all of this, I really am kind of interested in what atheists ought to know, ought to think, ought to do about this upcoming conclave, and what our role in any of this is.
Well, I think as an atheist, as somebody who arrived there by examining my own faith, that it might be part of my responsibility, maybe, some kind of duty, if you will, to be able to speak from experience or speak about the things that I learned about religion and how we come into possession of these leaders. I don't think that you're going to see a whole lot of Catholics start to break down the process of how a pope is decided or what that has looked like in the past. So maybe some of us who are already out there doing the research can help along with that. I don't know that people know that there hasn't been a non-European pope selected in 1,300 years, which I think is significant. I think that goes to show the amount of global politics and influence that the more powerful countries of this world have,
sure,
and how much they're intertwined
on a leader that is allegedly picked for purely moral, spiritual, if not directly by the hand of God type reasons. Absolutely.
And in all of the popes that we've had, this the next one I believe will be 267. They have all had some kind of alignment with political forces. Even the late Pope, had some headbutting, maybe not alignment, but certainly headbutting with Secretary Homan, the Homeland Security Secretary of the United States, and Vice President J.D. Vance. There was a back and forth with him and those two individuals, let alone many others. There were calls for political reform in his home country of Argentina. Well, go figure. Why Argentina and why not more places? Why were his reforms so focused on immigrants? Because, well, if you look at the immigration relationship with the United States, the hegemon in the Western Hemisphere, and you look at how the United States has not only responded to immigration recently, but how we've actually led the need for people to immigrate. If you think about our involvement in politics in the Western Hemisphere,
displacing people around the world.
Sure. So there is not this this absence of international politics when it comes to the papacy. Sure. The Pope is not acting independently. It's going to be a reflection, maybe even a repudiation of some of the more powerful nations in the world, and maybe a reflection of some of the things that the people of the world want, whether and what the people that those cardinals are representing. So I do think that this is not just an independent body, as powerful as it may be, but this is very much intertwined with the ongoings of the international system. And that I don't think a lot of people understand.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, even as you sort of describe the mysterious conclave process, I guess I have to start by asking, did you see the movie Conclave? And can we hope for an intersex pope?
Oh, well, I did not see the movie Conclave, but I would say, in my opinion, there's probably no hope for an intersex pope. even the Pope saying, in not so many words, but I'll paraphrase, we should respect the LGBTQ community, that was considered progressive. Respecting people was considered progressive. There is one.
Bring them into our churches, let them donate their tithes. Don't let them be themselves, but let's respect their ability to participate in, I guess, propagating our belief system.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that an overly cynical read?
No, I think that is not what they admit to, but certainly what the message was. I mean, look at the number of church participation in the last 50 years. It's declining rapidly. I don't have an exact number, but I do think it's somewhere around 30%, a 30% decline from the 1970s to now. I read a statistic recently that the number of nuns that have left the Catholic Church in the last 10 years is somewhere around 100,000. That's huge. That's 10,000 women every year not wanting to support this system. And so I think that we have a call for more recognition, for more members of a society that is otherwise rendered a second-class citizen, or maybe not even a citizen at all. There's a cardinal in Philippines who is called, I don't remember his name, but he's often referred to as the gay cardinal. Well, given the fact that he can't be married and he's not supposed to have sexual relationship outside of at all, but his oath is to God in that sense, right?
Sure.
He can't actually be gay unless he's doing he can't be acting on it. So I don't think that there's any proof that he's acting on it, but he's often called the gay pope strictly because of his acceptance and representation of the LGBTQ community in the Philippines, particularly. And some think that he stands a good chance of being elected, and he would be a strong continuation, another progressive pope like the one we just saw. But I don't think that my experience, our history, our experience as a species, if you will, as a global population, can put much faith, if you will, in that regard. I think that we're more likely to see a kickback to the traditional stance. We'll probably see another European pope, in my opinion.
I hear that. Yeah. And, it is worth sort of asking the question, or it's maybe central to what I'm interested in here, as to whether or not it kind of even matters if we get a quote unquote progressive pope. I mean, you said a lot of people maintain that Pope Francis had this reputation as being more progressive. And yeah, I do think that there is evidence that he had maybe a slightly softer tone, but I don't know that he really did anything meaningful to change the church's stance on queer rights, on women's rights, or the church's sex abuse crisis. Some people will really quibble over that last one and say that after sort of initially being cold and distant, that he really wrapped the arms of the church around these victims. But it feels like so little compared to the need and to really take on some of these problems. I mean, honestly, does it matter who they choose or who's atop that Pope mobile?
I really don't think so. So let's take the last two popes. So we had Pope Benedict, who stepped down in 2013 and led to the selection of Pope Francis. And, Pope Francis kind of got lucky because actually the scandals and the reports on corruption in the Catholic Church that Pope Benedict was actively trying to counter, those scandals were leaked by Pope Benedict's butler. So I don't know that any of us actually would have ever known about them if that wasn't leaked. And would Pope Francis have shown some transparency and let members of the Catholic Church know what was going on inside the church? The political corruption, the financial corruption. It turned out that the Catholic Church was a top money launderer for some of the most infamous criminal organizations in the world, and was tied up with organized crime. So it turns out that many cardinals were sexually abusing other priests, but also children, and then being moved around so that they didn't face prosecution. I don't know that all of those things would have come out. Pope Francis, in some respect, was lucky that that was leaked and that he got elected. He may very well not have shown that either, but he got to step up and say, okay, we're going to change these things. But it just goes to show you the level of secrecy that has been kept from the public for so long. And this isn't, a lot of people will say, well, this is a recent problem. No, there have been popes that have had families, that have had children.
Sure. Yeah.
There have been popes. the Council of Nicaea talks about what to do and how what to do with and how eunuchs should be used. They were actively considering how to castrate boys and how to put them to the service of the church. So this idea that there is some kind of newfound
few
recovery,
bad apples, or
not newfound at all. And I just don't know that whether it's a progressive or a traditional pope, that we're going to see much difference unless there's some change from within, and it's got to be drastic and it's got to be obvious.
Yeah. So whether it is a quote good pope or a bad pope, what are some of the other impacts on the very real lives of Catholics and heathens alike?
Well, I think that the Pope yields a significant amount of soft power. Okay, so they might not have a military anymore, but they still get to exercise some of the other instruments of power that other governments and other maybe non-governmental or transnational organizations get to operate, right? So they've got diplomatic and economic power. They've got.
And we're talking about a very meaningful influence on some 1 billion people.
Absolutely.
Like 10% plus of the world's population is going to make meaningful decisions based on these opinions.
That's absolutely right. That they have their own Secretary of State in the Vatican. The Vatican has its own government, and they've got ambassadorships that are independent of the different cardinals and bishops through which orders or influence would flow. These people are in maybe cahoots with other governments. For example, I noted that the most recent pope was very, very much inclined to solve some immigration and Western Hemisphere problems. I think that's another reason why we will not see a pope from the United States. Can you imagine the most powerful country having the arguably most powerful religious position? I don't think that a lot of cardinals would vote in that direction, and I think that's because the papacy is not absent of international politics. And so I think that whoever the new pope is going to be able to influence people's lives, the same way that a very powerful nation or a very powerful military could, through the use of diplomacy and through having a stage through which they can have their voice heard worldwide. And I think it's a very natural thing for many people to look at the Pope, and even if they're not Catholic, but still Christian, and we did as Lutherans growing up, we weren't Catholics, but there was a certain amount of deference to the Pope. If the Pope was going to visit the United States, that was a big deal. Or if the Pope said something or got sick, that was still, a big deal. So I think that there is a lot of, like I said, implications, second and third order effects that come from just the Pope saying and feeling certain ways about certain things. And, my concern is the LGBTQ worldwide community and that of women as well. So.
Yeah. Well, so I guess before we jump onto the lines, the last question I really want to touch on here is that, obviously like rank and file Catholics, let alone volunteer blasphemers like you and I, we have no say on the outcome of this conclave. But what should we be on the lookout for? And how do we maybe react or respond to whatever it is that we see there?
Well, we're all certainly going to be looking for white smoke, right?
Sure.
So here's something that I found interesting, or I always thought was interesting, that the popes, once they start voting, the cardinals, once they start voting, they vote every 4 hours until they have a 1/3 majority. So that leads me to ask, well, why are they changing their votes? What is going on? What kind of secret discussions, what kind of promises and negotiations are being made? We don't have the transparency that we're used to. As Americans, we are very used to, and we often demand transparency. I don't believe that we're going to see that. I do think what people should look out for is perhaps negotiations happening or world leaders speaking up, right? Publicly, but certainly privately. I think a lot of the church leadership is going to hear from local or national and state government leaders and, well wishes of that sort, or highlighting their problems, highlighting their initiatives, their concerns. I think that is going to be a very common thing, because I think that the electing body, the voting body of cardinals, is going to want to know, what they can expect. So I think that people should just be looking out for who is talking and what they're saying. And it's going to be very telling of who the next pope is going to be.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. It's interesting times, just another news story for us all to be following in a world where the news seems to be coming very, very fast and scary in a lot of ways. But I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and jump on the line with Jacob in Tennessee, who has some insights into gender. Jacob, tell us what's on your mind.
Hi, what's going on? I just want to say, long-time listener. I have been listening to Talk Heathen since back when Eric was the host. I haven't.
Thanks for your support,
Christy. I thought you would be. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I said thanks for your support, but I won't interrupt again.
Oh, right. Yeah, I've seen you. I haven't seen you, Jimmy. I haven't seen you talk. I've maybe seen like a couple clips with you or a couple like thumbnails with you, Christy. I've heard you talk quite often, and I thought you would be a pretty interesting person to talk with about this. And I'm sure, Jimmy, you've got some things to say as well. And I know this topic has kind of been beat to death. I'm not your ignorant caller, okay? I've been trying to educate myself on this for the past year. And I want to kind of start by asking, like, you and everyone not to assume any negative stuff in the conversation. Like, just give me goodwill. Don't assume I have any bad intentions. Because the main thing I get when I try to discuss this is people instantly, well, why do you care about this topic? And the answer is fairly obvious if you don't assume anything bad about me. The reason is because I have a gender nonconforming family member. And over the past year, I've been kind of educating myself about this more and more. I live outside of Nashville, right? I actually had a trans boss for about a year. I didn't discuss too many concepts with him, but a few here and there. So I don't have a ton of experience with it. So that's kind of my framing for coming into it, right? And,
okay, well, fair enough. Yeah, let's dive in. What is it that you are playing around with or trying to understand?
Would you agree that you always hear this thing? It's kind of a conflation. You hear gender is assigned at birth, but that's not really true. At least for me,
it is and it isn't. I kind of take your meaning, but we can explore that a little bit. People rarely go home with balloons from the hospital that say it's a female or it has large gametes. They go home and say it's a boy, it's a girl. And, we might think of that as a gendered term rather than a biological term. But honestly, even that notion of biological sex is much more nuanced and complicated. And, it's been said before, so we don't necessarily need to get into every aspect of that. But tell me where this question leads.
Well, it leads to the idea that, you don't want to assign gender at birth, because it's not known, right? We assign sex at birth typically, and you don't want to assign gender because it could, it's not necessarily formed. So I'm
sure.
Coming in
the notion of like raising babies, of letting a child have a non-specific gender identity until they reach an age at which they're able to understand these concepts and express it for themselves. which is not a super commonly held view, but is that sort of the philosophy that you're discussing here?
No, I do understand that though. So reading about this, I can't get a solid mark on when gender is formed, right? At what age is gender solidified in someone's mind? And I've been looking at some of the research, and there's a study on gender non-contentness. I don't know if you've seen this. It's done last year, and it goes. They ask people basically, are you happy with your sex? Do you want to be the opposite sex? A version of that, multiple versions of that, right? And I think it was like 23% of females aged 11 said no, and then at 25 it was 2%, right?
Sure.
So what I'm trying to figure out is, and I'm coming in with the notion that I don't know when it's formed, and I looked at a lot of, basically I looked to like, well, who's the go-to on this? And I read about the history a little bit. My understanding was Sweden is the go-to. Sweden's been doing this longer than anybody. They're the first people to basically provide medical procedures for trans people. They've been doing it for like 55 years, right? And there's other countries too, like multiple other countries, but like Denmark. You can European studies are pretty interesting because I think the American system is a little polluted by capitalism, right? It's just inherent in the system. Capitalism is going to has forces that play a role in our medical and in the U.S. medical system. It's just inherent in the system.
Yeah.
And you don't get that with a lot of these European countries like Sweden. Sweden considered to have the number one healthcare in the world. And they came out recently, I think it was maybe it was last year. I can look at the date. But they came out and they said that they were basically, what I got from it was that they weren't sure that there was a huge spike in people coming to gender clinics. I think they quoted like 4,000%, specifically female to male was the big hike, and that they were limiting everything in terms of children to therapy, and then everything else was going to be done in like scientific research, like research study setting, not a clinical doctor setting.
Okay, yeah. So we're covering a lot of ground here, and I guess I'm a little bit interested to get to a particular question that we can maybe try to answer or chew on. I will say that if the question is when is gender identity solidified, I would say never. When is your identity solidified? Certainly there are periods at which we see it change a lot quicker. If you were to ask a bunch of 11-year-olds about their relationship with their favorite band or their favorite TV show, and then ask them again a few years later, like there's going to be a lot of identity formation and a lot of changing between, let's say, just 11 and 16. That, of course, is at a population level. That's a very broad sort of statement. But I will say sort of fundamentally, we as humans are always evolving, and our perception of ourselves is always evolving and changing. And that's a lifelong process. I don't know that our gender ever like fully stops evolving in that sense either, even if it does tend to become a lot more solidified as we get through puberty and as we start to form a more broad understanding of ourselves. But where is all this leading? What's the kind of ultimate question or point that you wanted to make here?
I don't know if there's an ultimate point or question. It's a bit of a long conversation, and I was hoping that you could maybe help me find some research that I'm not able to find. I'm sure it's out there, because whenever if you believe trans people have existed throughout history.
Very, very much so. Yeah, of course. Obviously, that concept of transness is a modern lens that we try to apply to historical people, and that can always be very, very messy. I'm not trained as an anthropologist. The philosophy of all of that might be a little bit outside of the scope of our conversation, but the notion of trans identities being tied to aspects of our biology that have been around for as long as we've been human is pretty fundamental, I think, to trans theory in the modern world.
Yeah, I was trying to find some like historical document, because it's not like we have the words to express that idea, right? All throughout history, right? Man, woman, right? That's kind of like the birds and the bees, right? It's what you have to create a child. You know, it's kind of the basis for how the population grows. So it's a very, very fundamental thing. So in terms of like the language, it's always been able, like you've been able to express yourself as, I'm a man.
I mean, yes and no. Like even the word gender is something that didn't really enter the English vernacular until the 70s. And it's a term that we sort of stole from linguistics rather than from the social sciences or the biological sciences. So there is a lot of nuance to these kinds of conversations. I will tell you that we certainly did our damnedest when we were doing secular sexuality on this network to interview historians and people who had an understanding of trans histories and why so many of those have been deleted or removed from the archive, but also what we do know to continue to exist. So secular sexuality would be one resource that I might point you towards, though there are certainly many others.
Yeah, it's harder to find things now. Like you used to be. That's kind of a tangent, but I would be really interested, and I've been trying to digging for like historical, documents. I mean, I don't know how long modern medical records go back, but there has to be something in there at some point, and I'd really love to know what it is. But
hey, Jacob,
yeah,
Jacob, are you a student?
Sure.
Are you enrolled in school anywhere?
No, not currently. No.
No. All right, because there is a database of historical documents, or just professional writings that you could find. It's called JSTOR. It's JSTOR. And usually, if you have a university or college email, you can access it for free. But otherwise, you'd have to pay for it. But these are documents, works, whether they're books or articles. It's a scholarly journal. This is a database that has millions of different works categorized and ready for your download if you want. So you can take a look at that, and then of course when you look at that, you always want to pay attention to the references in the back. A lot of times you can go to museums and access archives and things like that. So I mean, don't limit yourself. And I don't know how much digging you're doing, but I mean, a Google search or something like that, you really need to kind of go straight to the primary sources, and you can get those through more scholarly avenues that are supported by different university archives and things like that. I don't know if that'll help, but if you write down JSTOR and go look at JSTOR, you might find something that talks about transgender identity in early human history.
Sure. And, talking to you guys has given me a couple ideas. I bet I could probably reach out to a professor at the university.
I guarantee that you could. I guarantee. Yeah. So I teach college at two universities up here in the Northeast. I'm an assistant professor, so I'm not a full-fledged professor, no PhD or anything, but I have a lot of access to, to different scholars, and they're like so willing to talk about their craft. If they got an email from you, yeah. I guarantee, maybe not everybody, but I guarantee you'll get an answer, or at least the right path. You'll definitely be put on that. And so it's definitely worth thinking outside the box. But start there, start with the database that I gave you and see what you come up with.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll probably maybe get like a list or I'll try and find multiple professors and send out, an email to maybe 10 of them. I bet you anything I'll get a response. So yeah, and I was trying to understand it historically, and where I'm trying to go with this is, so like I'm conflicted now. you have my perspective. I'm looking at this.
Tell us about that
Gender
conflict.
nonconforming.
Yeah, what does it ultimately come down to? That either X is true or Y is true? What's that central concern?
It's what's the best thing for my family member, essentially. And I looking at what Europe has done recently, and looking a little bit at psychology, about, like, you know, basically, I've been researching models on how people process information, and at what age you have the capacity to understand multiple complex ideas and compare and contrast them, right? And what I found there is there's Peugeot's cognitive development theory and there's information processing theory. Those were the two main ones. And Peugeot claims that it's not until about 20 that you're capable of contrasting basically conflicting complex topics, right? So that kind of leads me to, you know, kind of think in my mind, well, if we have a gender nonconforming kid, gender isn't fluid, and like it's just I'm a little confused as to what the best path is, because I'm getting.
I hear that, but I think you may be going a little bit too heady in certain ways. And I don't mean to be at all anti-intellectual about it, but I don't think that like Piaget's theory of cognitive development was ever meant to be applied to providing healthcare access to teenagers. I think that honestly, you might want to center the conversation a little bit more on, all right, what is this person's need? What is their distress? What kinds of struggles are they having, or what kind of pain are they in? And then what kind of potential solutions are on offer, whether that is in consultation with a medical doctor or with a therapist. Like, these are the experts that you might want to be consulting, and you don't have to just take their word for it because they're a doctor or because they're an expert. But if they are your treatment provider, your child's treatment provider, then you want to be in conversation with them about what they recommend and why. We have data that is much more grounded in this issue than trying to understand the stories of, you know, Lily Elb receiving a gender confirmation surgery 100 years ago, of, you know, the universal friend being a non-binary historical person in colonial America, is not going to be nearly as relevant to the question of what does my child need in order to thrive as, for instance, all of the data that we have from an organization like the Trevor Project, demonstrating the way that gender acceptance is going to be highly correlated with health and well-being measures like our sleep and suicide rates and diet and exercise. And, you know, there's so many places that you could be looking that aren't so wrapped up in the philosophy of, are trans people real?
And it does not have to do with trans people. Well, it's just, that's what kind of person I am. Like, I start from the bottom and work my way up, you know, and that was a bit of a tangent, right? That's not.
I mean,
really,
I very much appreciate that. And I don't mean to be anti-intellectual. I very much value these historical documents and stories and things like that. But I'm also a clinician. You know, I'm not a psychological researcher. I'm somebody who reads psychological research and then works to apply that in the day-to-day lives of real people. And if your concern is more about the health and well-being of a real person, then I would encourage you to think more like a clinician than like a architect or engineer.
I'm getting there. It just I got to put all the pieces together. And I really wanted to explain my backstory because people assume so many things when I try and discuss this topic. They assume the worst. I get that for whatever reason, and so I just wanted to kind of start from the ground up with you guys so you understand everything. So nothing was kind of assumed, but so where was I going to take this?
Yeah, well, I guess I want to say I'm not here to absolve you of your sins. I'm not here to persecute you for them. Whether you're a good person or a bad person, or whether you have the right motivate, those aren't questions that I think are particularly interesting, or that I, as a stranger on the internet, am qualified to try and explore or examine. Let me let you off the hook in that sense, while also inviting you to use the best resources available to offer love and care and support to a vulnerable child in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're a clinician, so you would be a really good person to ask this question to. It's kind of what I was leading to. There's a lot of thoughts kind of going through my head. So do you know about the original, the medical history of how basically a transmedicalization, right? And kind of like, I guess there's like an original, couple people, and then it expands out from that. Do you know much about like the history? Because basically,
I'm certainly not a medical historian by any means. I referenced Lily Elb a moment ago, and I think that that's a interesting story that more people should be aware of. But again, where exactly are we heading with this, and how does it apply to the health and well-being of a real human person in your life today? I mean,
so we're going, yeah. Well, I'm trying to get ahead of it because I don't know, because they're gender nonconforming. But so coming from a skeptic, I'm trying to find basically the research that was done in the beginning, where somebody is presenting as wanting to be the opposite sex, and they have instead of having multiple treatments, they have one treatment.
I'm confused. I'm sorry. So Jacob, I'm sorry. Please allow me to step in before I get too confused, and then we build a house of cards, and I have no idea what's going on. But so you're trying to get. This is something I'm confused about. You're trying to get ahead of what? That's A, right? What is it exactly that you're trying to get ahead of? But B, when you talk about, you're conflating sex and gender a little bit, right? Because you're talking about when does gender take hold? When is gender assigned? When do people conform to this identity that they're essentially told that they have? But then you're talking about people who also want to be the, excuse me. I'm sorry. Say one more time.
I didn't say that I told that. I mean, you're not really told your gender. You're told your sex.
Right. Okay. And now you're talking about people who want to be the opposite sex, but the gender and I think that you are told your gender. I mean,
I think I addressed that in the opening parts of this call. Like, nobody is walking around holding their baby female. They're talking about their baby girl. And that is a meaningful use of gendered language.
But the thing is, though, Jacob, you're trying to get ahead of what exactly? Like, this family member of yours doesn't conform to the gender roles or the gender identities that are largely either man or woman, boy or girl, right? And they don't buy them. So what? The only reason why somebody is considered transgender is because we tell them that there's a such thing as gender, when we don't really know. I mean, you could talk about going back in history and when did this start. We have no idea what early human gender roles were, really. I mean, we have an idea, but how close were men and women, or males and females, at performing the same tasks or at fitting into society? They're probably a lot closer in early human history than they are now, where we tell people what a woman should be doing or what a man should be doing and what is acceptable and what is not. I think that this family member you have has a great deal of courage. I assume, as a young person who is saying, I am not going to accept what I'm told about who I am. I just need to figure it out for myself. And I think to you to ask, well, what's the best thing for this family member? Compassion. Love, right? I really liked when in the beginning of this call you said people want to know why I'm so concerned about it, and I tell them, well, because a member of my family is nonconformist. I think that is a a good start to a defense of this person. And I think that you should advertise and highlight that you care about this person and you do want to learn about what they're going through. But I don't think there's anything to get ahead of. I think you need to be there with them for their journey, and just show them support and let them know that they're loved no matter what. And that's what I've been thinking about this whole time. So thank you, Christy, and thank you, Jacob, for letting me get that out.
No, please.
No, absolutely. I mean, you're totally right. But as a father, I can't help but want to dig at the data, dig at the research, look at what the science says, look at, because this doesn't seem to be a sealed subject in terms of what the appropriate medical process is. So,
I mean, all of that is fair, but let me just ask you this question before we start to look at some of the other calls here. If your child was not struggling with gender dysphoria or with trying to fit their gender into an unaccepting world, but rather was dealing with pancreatic cancer, I would definitely implore you to read up, to learn more about cancer, to have an in-depth understanding of what appropriate treatment plans might be, and to recognize and understand why in some situations, some doctors might recommend one treatment plan and other doctors might recommend a different one, and to try and make informed choices about that treatment plan for and with your child, being supported by their medical team and their other service providers. I would implore you to take the same approach here. It is valuable to try and understand maybe the history of gender dysphoria and whatever that means historically and all of these like complicated ideas, but you don't need to become an expert in oncology to be a good parent to a sick child. And the real goal here is not to understand the history of cancer diagnosis, but to understand the treatment plans that are available to the person that you care about.
And you just put the crux on the whole thing, to a sick child. And that's what that's what they don't necessarily think they're sick. I don't necessarily think they're sick. Right.
And it's about fitting into a left-handed or a right-handed world as a left-handed person. I certainly don't mean that being trans is a sickness, but I do want to acknowledge that trying to fit in as a gender non-conforming person in a very prescriptive society is going to come along with some pain. And that's without speaking to specifics like gender dysphoria or body dysmorphia and some of these other ideas.
Sure. Yeah, I can tell you, living outside of Nashville in somewhat rural America, people around here are very accepting. We had a trans gentleman that was prom king 2 years ago. The community is great around here where I'm at with this stuff. And what I'm trying to get at right now is, like I said, I'm trying to get my hands on basically the original research where they were doing one thing at a time. Whereas now, if you present to a clinic as transgender, there's multiple procedures they would start, right? You would start.
I don't necessarily know that I would take that summation, but I guess I would just again point out that there is no one cancer treatment at a time. That there are multiple ways of addressing complex issues. And again, I don't mean to say that transness is a disease the way that cancer is, but I do want you, as you are looking at these medicalized notions of sex and gender, to really take seriously the idea that we're not asking a simple question of should we or should we not flip this particular switch. You're never going to find the original single treatment flow. And I'd encourage you to look in very different directions. So I want to be respectful towards the other callers that we have on the line. And I hope that I've been able to kind of get through that this is not a singular issue in the way that I feel like maybe you're trying to present it, and that a historical approach, a research approach is not going to be as effective as one that's maybe more clinically driven and that is in coordination with a team of service providers, as well as especially the child that you're concerned about. But with all of that epilogue and all of that other information, Jimmy, anything else that we want to make sure to address before we move on?
Sure. I thought that your metaphor was great. And while being trans is not a sickness, it certainly can feel that way in a world where people are telling you you're sick. Right. Sure. And so it's a struggle. And yeah, just understanding the struggle and helping them along, being there, very important.
I can give you just a quick summation before you let me go. Sure. So right now where I'm at is right there, gender nonconforming. I'm thinking that they might present as trans in a few years. And they don't think they're sick. They've never said anything about wanting to go to the doctor, this or that. But I'm trying to figure out at what point do I step in as a father and maybe take them to the doctor, right? They don't think they want to go, but I think they do. Right. And that's where I'm trying to get to. That's why I'm interested in the original studies where they divide up the studies and they don't do them all at once. And that's where I'm trying to get to. And
so let me just give you this very simple but incredibly important razor, which is the distress principle. If it doesn't hurt, then you likely don't need to do anything to change it. I think that every teenager would probably benefit from talking to a therapist at one point or another, particularly when you are in a vulnerable minority. So however we're defining gender nonconformity, there's going to be some vulnerability to that idea. But what we're looking for is pain. Does something hurt? And if it does, then what can we do about it? But if there isn't pain, if there isn't distress, if there isn't a lot of sleepless nights, or, every teenager is going to struggle. But if those struggles feel like they are all headed in a healthy direction and nothing is overwhelming, it can still be beneficial to talk to a mental health clinician or some other form of therapist. But that would be what I would encourage you to look for is anybody in pain? Is there any hurt here? What's the distress like?
Sure. And I'll let you guys get the other callers. I was hoping we could get to some of the studies where they talk about like the individual treatments, and before they get to them, I was hoping to maybe dig them up and call back and go a little bit further with this.
Those are such broad questions and broad ideas. But if you would like to continue the conversation, by all means, shoot me an email. I'd love to hear from you. Host at atheist-community.org. They'll make sure to get that information to me, or I apologize, TV at atheist-community.org, where you can reach me and we can continue this conversation in one form or another. And I do hope to speak to you again about it.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Thank you. I really appreciate y'all's time.
Hey, thank you so much.
Take care, Jacob. Thanks.
All right. Well, I do want to tell people they have just a little bit more time to get their super chats in. We'd love to answer their questions or offer comments. I think we've had a few come in already. Jimmy, do you want to hit those for me?
Oh, I do, but I don't have the show document pulled up.
Yeah, no worries. No, I've got that in front of me.
Let me go find it for later.
Got a $5 from Vegan Aliens who said, have you watched Christspiracy yet? The biggest cover-up in 2,000 years. All right, interesting idea for people to check out. Not one I'm familiar with myself just yet. And then Jimmy, our friend, the Blind Limey, offered $5. Yea, and I say unto you, smasheth the like button as a potter's vessel, and hit subscribe as you would strike an unruly child. Algorithms 6ix9ine.
Oh, Jamie.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you for that palate cleanser before we dive in. Okay, we've got a couple of interesting calls here. Just knowing we may not get to everybody, who would you like to start with, Jimmy?
I know who I want to start with. I think that we have to do something, though, that we haven't done yet. Yeah. The crew cam. We haven't seen
apologies to me. Yeah, from me. Absolutely. Let's thank everybody for their hard work and their shining faces. If we can get that pulled up.
All right.
Large staff today. Thank you all so much. Apologies on me.
Look at Lee's old wise beard. Isn't that beautiful? Man.
Just glorious. Just glorious. We should all be so lucky.
Awesome. I like, speaking of Lee and wisdom, I like Lee on the line from Canada. So I would love to hear what Lee has to say. It looks like he's got a question for you, Christy, and I'm super excited about this because, it reflects what we talked about in the beginning.
Sure. Yeah. So Lee, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Christy and Jimmy.
Hey.
And Jimmy, please feel free to to cut in or say something too. But I used to be a very active person in the Catholic Church back in most of my life. Active in the parish, was even in the seminary for a while, that sort of thing. But now I'm a very active atheist. And it's weird when, the things going around the Pope and the conclave and all that would all have been very important things for my friends and I talking about all the time. Now, I have some interest, but I still, there's like I feel not completely comfortable. Like I can listen a little bit, but I don't want to hear too much about it. I think about it a little bit. I can't help myself, but there's just some sort of discomfort there that I can't really put a finger on. And maybe you can talk to that.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say as a therapist, like a bizarre amount of my week is taken up talking to people about, okay, how do we take in the news? How much news do we need to be taking in? Is there value in reading every headline or in doom scrolling through TikTok for hour after hour as you learn about the, descent into madness? And I want to say that it is important that we be informed, but that we be pretty mindful about the way we take it in, because a lot of these things are going to be triggering. And when we talk about the coverage of the papal conclave and of the, sitting in state and Pope Francis's death and all of these kinds of things, it's going to stir up a lot of big feelings for a lot of people. And I hope that you would be tender with yourself and not feel like there's something wrong with you or that you are obligated to push through it or memorize every, news factoid right now.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm not feeling like I really need to do all of that. It just seems that it's hard to even look at YouTube or have a TV on or radio or whatever, and they're talking about it. And like I say, I've got some part of me is fascinated, another part of me doesn't want to hear anything about it. It kind of, in some ways, it kind of repulses me to some extent. And it's just a weird, I don't know, is it some dissonance going on, I think.
Yeah. And we might anticipate that from a trauma response. I have tried really hard when doing these shows to emphasize what I think is an important point, which is that trauma is not this horrible, awful, terrible thing that happened to you. It certainly can be, but trauma is not the event or the thing that caused pain. It's the pain itself. It's not the fall that kills you, it's the landing. So there's no need, I think, to say, well, this doesn't raise to the level of being traumatic, or my trauma, my pain is insignificant. I recognize there's a total difference between having a small cut on the heel of your foot and shattering your ankle. So we can sort of put these things on a spectrum, but we also don't need to deny that having a rock in your shoe or having a bruise on your heel is still painful and is still matters. So Lee, I don't want to diminish your pain in the least bit, but rather validate it and say that we so often get into this place of, well, it's fine. It doesn't hurt that badly. And if that's the case, great, good for you. But we also don't need to dismiss the pain that is here. And as we see these news stories that sort of stir up some of that pain, it may be an indication that there is old trauma that hasn't fully healed or hasn't healed well. And perhaps a lot of that will pass as more time goes on, as some of these stories drop out of the news. perhaps they're worth addressing a little bit more headlong, whether that's through a good book about religious trauma or with the help of a supportive therapist or, other people in your community.
Thanks, Christy. I'm curious if Jimmy's got anything to say.
Sure, I do. Well, I don't know that I can have quite the expertise, but I do want to speak from my own personal experience and just say that I think that I'll put myself in my religious shoes, as a former Lutheran, right? I grew up believing certain things as part of a community and as part of a congregation where I could look around and see familiar faces. And I knew that they were concerned about me. They cared about me. They considered us part of the same tribe. And even though I eventually moved on and I kind of denounced Christianity and took an outward approach against it, a step against some of the things that it is, I would say, compliant in. And I would still feel maybe a sense of loss if something, let's say, were to happen to one of those people, or if somebody burned down the church that I grew up going to. I feel a connection, a piece of history, a piece of myself in some of those people and in that building. And it's part of my story, and to see negative things happen to people and places and experience that I consider all part of the building blocks that make me who I am, I think it's okay to feel a little bit of hurt and disappointment. Maybe that might be something that you're experiencing. You probably gave a lot of your life to Catholicism and were trained for a long time to look up to the man at the front of the congregation, the guy with the book in the cloth, not only in your own local congregation, but that of the global congregation in the Pope. And it could still sting, when you feel a loss or some kind of negative impact toward those people or that body. I think it's perfectly understandable. And I don't think that, you have anything to necessarily be ashamed about. I would liken it to maybe also like, I don't know, an ex-girlfriend or an old relationship. They're no longer a part of your life, but you don't want to see something bad happen to them, right? And so maybe there's just a little bit of that story that's a part of you that's being affected that feels so uncomfortable.
Yeah, well, being part of some sort of a community that's bigger than myself has always been a big thing for me. And I do miss that. That was a big motivation for me to reach out to various atheist communities, both close to me and even the ACA. But and actually, it's not just a Roman Catholic Church, and I don't want to. I don't need you. I don't want to blindside you with anything, Jimmy. But I've had kind of a traumatic experience with my with some years in the U.S. Army too, and and I get a kind of a dissonance. There's a big part of me that doesn't want anything to do with anything military, and another one that kind of misses some of the camaraderie I had, and that sort of thing. And it's I guess I got lots of issues. I gotta it'll take time to work through.
We all need help with something. You're not alone there.
Yeah, that's the nature of life. The bruises and scrapes that you take along the way. It's not to suggest that they all make you stronger, but also that you're just a person experiencing person things. This is not a sign that you are broken or weak, just that this is what comes of, wisdom. This is what comes of trying to make it through this life.
Thanks, guys, for your help.
Yeah, appreciate you so much. You have a good day.
You too.
Okay, well, Jimmy, do you suppose we should go ahead and jump into another call here?
Yeah, I do. Actually, I want to jump on the top 5 patrons. Is that all
Yeah,
right?
please.
We're getting commands from above that we need to show our love. So since I dropped the ball on the on the super chats, which by the way, folks, you should still send us some super chats. That way, I can maybe screw those up too. I am going to read the top 5 patrons, and that is number 1. Oops, all singularity. Number 2, Dingleberry Jackson. Number 3, Kalevi Helveti. Number 4, Brian Zupke. 5, J.A. Calton. An honorable mention to David S. Ward. Thank you so much to everybody who donates to us on Patreon. Kalevi Helveti, I don't know why it's not just me, but so many people give you like this Irish folk accent, but I hope you like it. And anyway, you all out there can have your name read as well, and you can donate to us on Patreon. But as members of Patreon, you also get access to exclusive content, earlier access to shows that only members have, maybe even the recordings of our after shows, which is only available on Patreon. So check us out at tiny.cc/Patreon-TH. And we do have an after show today, which I will be at, and I hope to see you there.
Yeah, we appreciate all forms of support and hope that you can get your name on that list. Meanwhile, let's go ahead and drop in with Dan from Canada, yeah?
Yeah, Dan.
Hey, Dan, I get that you are not impressed by the Pope talk. Tell me what's on your mind.
It's not that I'm not impressed by the Pope talk. I mean, I'm a Canadian. People talk about the royal family. They get really big into these things that have very little direct consequence to them. I mean, you can have a great Pope. You can have a terrible Pope. But your Catholic neighbor is going to do whatever your Catholic neighbor is going to do. So, I don't know who the Imam of Iran is or who the religious leader of Israel is or anybody else in the world. I'm aware of Catholics, so it seems like it's important, but the Catholic leadership is no more important to me than the Southern Baptist leadership or anybody else.
I get that. And I think the only, to kind of follow that metaphor, the only contrast I might draw is in the scope, right? Like you may be more familiar with the Dalai Lama than you are with some other like local regional monk or monasteryist and any form of religion. But the Pope is significant just due to sheer size and scale. I may not off the top of my head know the president of this corporation or that corporation, but I am at least aware of the doings of folks like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk because of the significance of the power that they wield. And I would argue that it has a factor in daily life. Now, some of the like more tabloidial stuff and the way people really fawn over, you mentioned the royal family, for instance, I do think that that's a great comparison. And I'm not interested in getting into any of that sort of stuff. I don't need to dig into the history of any of these folks and really lose sleep over whether we're going to get a good pope or a bad pope. Because, it does seem like it's going to be a crapshoot, and it doesn't seem like the policies of the church are going to change dramatically. And it's a hard thing to truly ignore. I don't know. How fair is all of that?
I think you're definitely right that it is a hard to ignore cultural phenomenon that's going on. I think in your country, there's a bigger focus on it than mine. You guys have had news about the Pope, and I haven't seen national news talking about the Pope other than his death and the fact that they're going to choose a new one. But there is so much going on and so many more things that are just vitally important to the day-to-day that a religious leader of any significance is only moderately significant.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And, truthfully, I think that the correlation between important news stories and fundable news stories or popular news stories is much looser than we should all like it. That's a evergreen complaint that definitely applies here.
And I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Dan, I want to jump in on that. I don't know that I necessarily think that it's only moderately important. I think as far as the Pope is concerned, there has been such a revolution over the last 500 years in Western culture that the Pope doesn't have as much power as he used to. But the thing is, if we don't continue to speak up and combat the abuses of Christianity, we very well could maybe end up back in that position. And you don't have to look far to see something like that. To answer your question, the Ayatollah Khomeini is not only the religious leader of Iran, but also the head of state. The leader of Iran. The head of state is actually their president, who is elected separately. The Ayatollah is elected by a parliamentary body, and they serve for life. They have control of their own military, and not only that, but they have control of the international relations arm of their military, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, who has what's called the Quds Forces. And the Quds Forces, you might have heard, are the people that go out and train terrorist groups and fund terrorist groups around the world. They see to the destabilization of the countries around them, like Iraq, which is still overrun with Shia militia groups, or otherwise known as SMGs, that come from Iran. And this kind of funding and this kind of influence, we see a worst case scenario with a religious leader that has access to a global community, right? The Pope, in a sense, also has access to a global community. The thing is, though, we have taken steps as Westerners to take their weapons away. They still have an enormous financial and cultural impact, to where even if your neighbor, like you say, is doing whatever they're going to do, that may be true. Maybe your neighbor in the open is a proud Catholic, but behind closed doors is having maybe a same-sex relationship and sinning in other ways, listening to death metal, who knows? But they're also donating huge sums of money to a Catholic church that says LGBTQ community and women are second-class citizens and white males are the top tier. That's a major problem for me. And so that is why it's so important for me to stay in tune with who is the next leader and what will their message be? Whose goals and whose aspirations will they reflect, and will they impact? And those are questions that I have. You know, there is kind of this tug of war within the Catholic Church, as if it's its own political body, between a more progressive pope and a more traditional pope. Will we get someone who's friendlier to the LGBTQ community, or will we get someone who reflects more medieval mindset? And that is an actual schism that's happening right now. There are political compromises made. There are promises made to world leaders, to cardinals, to different members of the Vatican government. And we see that play out over the course of the time that they're voting and changing their votes, as, you know, in conjunction with what they might get by their choice. And so, you know, I'm sorry, I don't mean to lecture you. I just have a lot to say about this, as far as the Catholic Church being very much a power structure that has far-reaching implications, as opposed to just being some kind of benign thing that's out there and doesn't really impact us. I would have to disagree there.
I have to agree with you that benign would not be the correct description.
Okay,
there is a vast amount of power, political power, financial power. But there's a vast amount of political power and financial power with Bezos.
Sure.
I mean, and from what you were telling me about Iran, it sounds like that's actually a more prominent place to be focusing news stories on than the Catholics. I'm not trying to be dismissive of its importance. I just think with everything going on in the last 24 hours, because, you know, before yesterday, everything's cool. You know, with everything going on, there's just, it's dropped down a tier.
Sure. Yeah. And I don't think that either of us would argue about how, you know, different news outlets set their agenda or what gets the A block posting. Yeah, that's certainly not a thing that we have any real meaningful say over. I'd like to think that we can vote with our dollars or whatever else, but the state of news media coverage is definitely a very real problem in our modern world. Is the Pope getting too much or not enough attention? I would argue not getting the right type of attention. And I think that this is often true when we see a like symbolic head of state die. The way that that is covered and talked about may not line up with my values. But, you know, we all are here trying to pay attention to the things that we feel like we ought to pay attention to. And this is certainly something that I think falls into that list, however we slice it.
I think we're all pretty nearby in our positions, so
sure.
I'm not going to throw in an argument or anything. I just that was my 2 cents. That was the poll question, and I appreciate your guys' feedback and the.
So I want to. If I may, I find this stuff really interesting. I'm sorry. International relations is my field of study. And so I would like to ask you a question. So did you hear that Jeff Bezos, right, is now making Amazon sellers list the price increase of the most recent tariffs from the United States? Did you hear that?
I have not, but I've been boycotting Amazon. So
okay, but that is somebody who is exercising his platform to affect politics, right? Jeff Bezos, while he may not be a religion, is certainly atop a power structure in a very different way than the Pope, but still has a platform to take an idea and to affect people politically and affect their lives, maybe even change the way they vote, simply by posting one country's economic policies in a place where we're not used to seeing economic policy, right? And so he has used his power to essentially insert himself into the American political arena. And nobody probably ever saw that coming, except if you considered maybe the financial support that he was able to provide, maybe some donations or, campaign support, things like that. But nobody ever thought, well, he's going to start posting economic policy impacts on the American citizenry. I think that is fascinating. And, it's just an example of the way that somebody who is at the top of the structure that you would normally think doesn't have that much of an impact can actually change their tune and change their methods to have a very significant impact. And so I would just ask people, maybe look at other power structures in that regard. Dan, are you much of a reader? I have a book recommendation for you that helped me, I think, look at power structures in a very different way.
I'll take a recommendation.
It's called The Retreat of the State, and it's by Susan Strange. And the interesting thing is that, and she's the late Susan Strange. The interesting thing, it was written in 1999 before the information age. And it turns out that she was actually kind of right about some of the things that she had to say when you look at different power structures and the way that they develop and influence the world. I don't think the Pope is any different. And she does have a section on religious organizations and leadership in there. So I think that you should check that out. And you might find that, useful.
I'm going to have to check that out.
Cool.
Yeah, please do. And thank you so much for giving us a call and for weighing in.
Appreciate your time, guys.
Thanks.
Take good care. All right. Well, we're going to get Richard back in to help us wrap up the show today and remind everybody of the question of the week. I do want to read a final super chat from Miranda Rensberger on this topic, who says, the Pope has less influence now that people can get information from multiple sources, but papal infallibility is still doctrine, and the 1.4 billion Catholics in the world do listen to what he says. Fair points.
Absolutely.
We need to make like Miranda Rensberger merchandise. She's killing it, and you crushed it on that. That was an awesome super chat. Thank you so much. I loved it, but Miranda, you should come to the Bat Cruise this year. That's what you should do. I need to know who this person is.
Donate those name, image, and likeness rights. Yeah, we can make something happen here. Yeah, well, Richard, before you remind us of the question of the week, anything else you wanted to weigh in on from today? Do you have any thoughts about an intersex pope or how to run a good conclave?
I think we've had some good calls today. I think they've been handled very, very well. I'm still not sure. I think the first caller has called a couple of times before. I'm still not entirely sure of their motivation. I'd like to kind of listen to more of what they think. I think that there's a slight difficulty, and it might be my end with him in that I'm never quite sure when he's going to get to what his main point is. And that may be a fault on my end. It may just because he's nervous and he's kind of got all these thoughts going through his head and he's trying to get them all out at once, and that's perfectly fine. I'd just like him to, before he calls back again, just kind of pin down one talking point he wants to discuss with us and kind of take it from there. I'd like to see that. And other than that, just a couple of points on the people in the chat. We have a couple of theists in the chat again who've been talking in the chat again, and they've not been as bad as usual with the kind of preaching and stuff. But they're still
not necessarily productive conversation.
Yeah, it's frustrating when
I know we want to hear from theists, but we want to be able to talk about heathenness and not just be preached at about it.
Yeah, and they've been having a couple of discussions in the chat where they've been kind of just rattling backwards and forwards with other people in the chat. We have a call-in show. You're in the chat for a call-in show. If you're a theist, give us a call. Please. I'm not trying to stop you talking in the chat, but, it would be great. And I'm sure most of the other people in the chat would prefer it if you called the show and had that conversation directly with us. And then you can go back to discussing it in the chat after your call. That's fine.
Yeah, and I want to make a special plea. Richard, was his name Mike Smith? The one who said that I have blind faith in atheism and that I need to be the one to question my blind faith. I don't know how that logically follows, but I would love a conversation with him the next time I'm on, which won't be actually for a while. But catch me in July sometime, Mike. I mean, please call me. Let's talk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a couple of repeat kind of commenters who are very good at putting the points forward on various platforms that we have in kind of the text, but are very unwilling to call, and that's frustrating, I think, for everyone. So anyway, let's get on to the question of the week. The prompt for this week is rewrite a scripture using modern slang. Reply in the comments and tune in at the beginning of next week's show for the top 3 answers. We cannot wait to hear them.
Absolutely. So I'm interested to see what people come up with. I imagine the comment section this week is going to be even cringier than a YouTube comment section on a political type show, a religious type show can be. But please join us there. Otherwise, guys, you sending out love rings to anybody in particular?
Yeah, I would have said love rings out to my wife. Babe, I love you. Mwah. Thank you.
I want to send them all out to all the theists because we do genuinely have, great conversations with a lot of the theists who call, and we don't hate you and we don't think you're stupid. We just want to have a good conversation with you. So that is it.
Yeah, well said, everybody. I want to send out love rings to parents of trans youth who are struggling through navigating that in this modern day and age, as well as anybody who's had their feelings, their traumatic memories sort of stirred up by everything that's in the news right now with regards to the Roman Catholic Church. But otherwise, we'll just go ahead and remind people that if you don't believe, this is your community. We appreciate you being here. And if you do believe, we definitely don't hate you.
We're
just not convinced.
convinced.
We want the truth. So watch Truth Wanted live, Fridays at 7 p.m. Central. Call 512-991-9242 or visit tiny.cc/call TW.